Hello, trauma warriors. I'm Janae with Defeating Childhood Trauma, and we are back in this ongoing series on the Cluster B continuum. And today it is antisocial personality disorders' turn to be in the hot seat. So, first things first, what's in a name? Well, when it comes to antisocial personality disorder, it has the most misleading label of all. Because when we think of antisocial, we think of a person who goes to a party and is unsocial. So we say to them, "Oh, you're being antisocial." And let me assure you, that kind of antisocial is completely unrelated to antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder is synonymous with psychopath, sociopath, and especially the sociopath, which is basically the emotionally dysregulated version of the psychopath. And this is the very one, antisocial personality disorder, that's the most commonly found in the prison population. Now, thanks to the internet, which has been taking the red flags of the other disorders and rebranding them as narcissists, we must first start by making a distinction between narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. Because in a lot of ways, antisocial can appear to be a more primitive version of narcissistic personality disorder. So, first, antisocial personality disorder is fully capable of hiding in plain sight. In fact, many of them can appear to be very charming, especially on the first meeting. And here's the difference. With the narcissist, they're going to appear charming because they have an excessive need for admiration. But for antisocial, it's more about getting what they want. They care less about what others think of them. In fact, of the cluster bees we've explored so far, this is the one who cares least about what others think. And it's more about, how can I get what I want? Now, next point, antisocial personality disorder has extreme self centeredness. And you might be thinking, well, yeah, so what? So is the narcissist. There's a difference. For the narcissist, they're living in the fantasy image. So it's ego driven. They need people to admire them. So they get to keep living in this illusion, believing that the fantasy image is the real image. Whereas antisocial is just extremely selfish. It isn't ego based because their brand of selfishness is so extreme that they aren't concerned with the others' opinions of them unless they can use that opinion to get what they want. And you will see it in the next comparison. The narcissist has insufficient empathy, while antisocial personality disorder has none. So when you have extreme self centeredness with a lack of empathy, that's already a huge red flag that you might be dealing with someone potentially dangerous. And with the narcissist, there's a difference between having insufficient empathy versus no empathy. In fact, the narcissist has cognitive empathy, and this means they simply understand the thoughts and feelings of others. They're able to understand that. The thing about the narcissist is they tend to play on the thoughts and feelings of others so that in exchange, they can get that narcissistic supply back. But with antisocial personality disorder, they have what's called social cognition, which is not empathy based at all. Social cognition is simply having the ability to process and store information on others, and they use it to manipulate. So they're storing information so that they could get whatever it is they want. Because, like I said, of all the cluster Bs. Narcissists care very much what people think of them and they want to be admired. Histrionics care very much what others think of them because they need that attention from others. Borderlines care very much what others think of them and they want people to feel sorry for them. But we get to antisocial, it isn't about that. They don't really care what people think of them. They care only as much as what can I get from this person? So, this is what I'm talking about when I'm describing extreme self centeredness. So self centered that they don't even care about what others think of them unless it's to their advantage. And if that isn't bad enough, they also have chronic feelings of boredom and contempt, which we will get into later, and they are highly impulsive. So, those are the main markers of antisocial personality disorder. And so, as we finally get into the criteria for antisocial, their key word is anti law, anti humanity. And it comes from a place of extreme self centeredness and a lack of empathy. Because having respect for the law and humanity means having an ability to consider things outside themselves. So if we think anti humanity, anti law, the rest of the criteria will make sense. So, criteria 1, persistently breaks the law. Now, for this criteria, don't limit your understanding to the kind of crimes that will make headline news. You can think smaller. In fact, it might be a better idea to do so because one more thing that the cluster Bs all have in common is an inability to handle conflict, both real and imagined. And I do stress real or imagined. They tend to overreact to conflict. So, what you may see on a smaller scale with antisocial personality disorder, if they decide to turn on you, you might wake up the next day with your tires slashed or sugar in your gas tank. Poisoning pets, even. I've heard of this too. So think of petty crimes as well, because not everyone with antisocial personality disorder will make headline news or end up in prison. That doesn't mean they aren't dangerous. Criteria 2 is aggressive and irritable with a history of fights and assaults. And now here's the scary part. Remember when I talked about one of the basic characteristics of antisocial personality disorder is that they have chronic feelings of boredom and contempt? Now is a good time to point something else out to you. They tend to feel both happiness and fear on a superficial level. Those emotions, for whatever reason, don't tend to go very deep in them. However, what they do feel very deeply is anger and frustration. So when you have this inability to experience happiness and fear, but you have all this anger and wrath combined with the boredom and the contempt, that's a pretty explosive combination all by itself. Combine that with the fact that their anger is severely dysregulated. They don't know how to manage it. And nope, I'm not making an excuse for them. This is helping us make sense out of the senselessness. This leads us into criteria 3, acts on impulse without giving much thought to future consequences. And they're very, very short sighted in their behavior. They are not going to plan things out all the way through. So let's put it all together right now with their chronic feelings of boredom and contempt and an inability to feel happiness or fear. Now they're acting on impulse without even thinking. Oh, but wait, there's more. Criteria 4, engages in reckless behaviors that create dangerous situations for self or others. And see, here again, they're going to appear fearless, all these reckless behaviors without any concern for themselves or others. Well, they lack empathy and they're extremely self centered. And an inability to feel fear on a deep level, combined with the impulsivity and all the anger that's completely dysregulated within them, these are increasingly more dangerous red flags that you see in antisocial personality disorder. Criteria 5 is deceitful and uses aliases, lies, or cons people to get what is wanted. And that was what I established in the beginning. They're less concerned with what people think of them because it's more about what can I get from this person? And it comes from the place of a complete insensitivity to the needs of others due to their lack of empathy and their selfish concerns on an extreme level. And before you go thinking that this criteria is the classic con artist, you can think on a smaller level as well with this one. For example, if they're known to constantly act out, but they meet someone new and for whatever reason, just because they feel like it, they want to put on their best behavior just to see what it's like for someone to see them as a decent person for a little while. Bear in mind, they're ruled by chronic feelings of boredom and contempt. So, whatever it is that can alleviate the boredom is another means they can play a con game just for their amusement. Put on an act for just a little while purely to take themselves out of the boredom. Another example is lying for the sake of lying without any reason or hope for gaining anything out of it. Criteria 6 is irresponsible with regard to work, financial, and family obligations. There's no sense of interpersonally responsible conduct with this criteria, meaning that cooperating with others is seen through a negative lens because of their extreme self centeredness. Also, because responsibilities aggravate their feelings of boredom and contempt and will tend to trigger them lashing out or simply leaving because they're highly impulsive. Criteria 7 lacks remorse as shown by indifference to or rationalizing of harm he or she has caused. Now, the rationalizing part of their behaviors are classic Darvo, where the cluster B disorders are concerned. All paths lead straight back to Darvo, which is a 5-letter acronym for deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. They can find an excuse for everything they've done and blame the victim as opposed to themselves. The other half of this criteria is showing a complete indifference. Well, let's think of the antisocials who do make headline news. What is it they typically say, when they are caught and they can't lie their way out of it anymore? What do they typically say if they say anything at all? When they are asked, why? Why did you do this? They say, I don't know, or just felt like it. And the third one usually goes, I just wanted to know what it would be like to do fill in the blank of whatever they did. And of course, Captain Obvious, as soon as we understand that they lack empathy and they have self centeredness on an extreme level, then of course it makes sense that they would have no remorse for what they did. Now, criteria 8 has a history of antisocial personality behaviors since adolescence. And this includes rule breaking, being physically aggressive, lying, disrespect for others and property, and even substance abuse, etc. And it's important to note here that it is very common for those with antisocial personality disorder to abuse substances, alcohol, substance abuse. It certainly doesn't apply to everyone with antisocial, but it's pretty common. Just because the chronic feelings of boredom and contempt, not being able to experience joy or fear very deeply, it works against them as they try and find some other form of a stimulant because whatever it is in their makeup, they can't experience joy the way that we do. Now, of the 10 traits that all cluster Bs have, where antisocial personality disorder is concerned, we only need to look at 3 of them. First, jealousy. After listening to the criteria, it might not occur to you that they're jealous of our joy deep down. And it makes a lot of sense when we consider the fact that they can't experience happiness on a deep level. Seeing other people's happiness while they have so much deep rooted anger within them makes them want to act out. Now let's review their poor impulse control without a thought of consequences. And while, yes, all cluster Bs have this tendency to not consider consequences before they act, and in fact, the most authentic thing about the cluster B disorders is that shocked facial expression the moment they learn there are consequences for what they have done. Well, with antisocial personality disorder, they are even more impulsive and more short sighted. And this is where antisocial personality disorder creates their very own karma. Let's use a very typical true crime story as an example. My husband and I are huge fans of Mike O with that chapter on YouTube. And, he makes true crime content. Uh, every time he covers a crime story where the motive for murder was life insurance, he does this little segment, and I'm going to try and get the accent. It goes something like this: life insurance, life insurance, life insurance. And it's hilarious. And why does he do that? Because it's the most common motive for these headline newsmakers. So, what kind of mistakes do you typically see in those types of true crime documentaries? True crime buffs, please back me up in the comments, okay? What are some of the things they typically do? Usually, they've done it once before and got away with it. So they're using their MO as this little blueprint for the next time they do it. They get a life insurance policy made up on their victim. And the moment the policy goes into effect, weird, something mysteriously happens to the victim. And the moment something happens to the victim, here comes the perpetrator into the insurance office wanting to cash in on that claim. And we're sitting on the couch watching this, slapping our forehead, going, "You idiot. You're not stopping to think about how suspicious you're looking right now. The fact that you're not even taking the time to mourn this so-called loved one of yours. And hey, why? Well, first of all, those of us sitting on the couch and slapping our foreheads and calling the perpetrator an idiot, we're also not the ones who are going to be inclined to commit a crime such as that, because we have this thing called empathy and an understanding of how other people feel and how other people would perceive us. With the antisocial, the reason they're committing this complete act of stupidity is they're not considering how they're looking because they're unconcerned with that. They're not considering that there are people out there who will care about this victim. They're not considering that the law might actually care. They're not considering any of these things. They're actually thinking it's all going to blow over up until they end up in the slammer. And so that's one of the little markers I'd like to give the true crime buffs. Next time you watch a true crime documentary, look for those little markers, the extreme short-sightedness that goes on behind these antisocial perpetrators. And you'll be able to spot the antisocial in there. Finally, let's scrutinize the masking and unmasking. Now, we can think of antisocial personality disorder as a scale from they could hide in plain sight. You have no idea you're in the company of a person with antisocial personality disorder. Or they can be on the other side of the scale where their attitude is more like, hold my beer because I don't care who sees me act up and act out. And as always, the golden rule with the cluster B disorders, those who see them behind the mask the most are going to be those living with them behind closed doors. Now, there's a reason that as we walk through the criteria, I wanted you guys to keep thinking of small, petty crimes as opposed to headline news. Because if you can see the petty crime examples, you're more inclined to recognize the red flags and live to tell. You're more inclined to see the red flags before it's too late, before you become a part of their headline news. Will all antisocial personality disorders make headline news? No, but it's like a game with Russian roulette with them. It's important for you to understand this. You never know with them. I have heard of other cases where they have been friends with somebody and suddenly, without any reason, turned on them, all because they felt like it in the moment. I cannot reiterate enough how highly unstable antisocial personality disorder is. And in my opinion, the moment that in the stigma movement decided to include the cluster B disorders is the very moment it became a scam. Yes, I said it, because it's silencing the voices of the advocates, the victims, and the survivors, all in the name of destigmatizing dangerous people. It's also misleading the well-intentioned people into wanting to help dangerous people who are a danger to their mental and physical health. We are not trained professionals, so stop flattering yourself that you can help them when even the trained professionals have a difficult time treating antisocial personality disorder. Do you want to know how they have to begin with treating antisocial personality disorder? It's by playing on their self-centeredness. It's the only way. They have to convince them to want to learn other means of getting what they want without the fear of legal consequences. And antisocial personality disorder will never develop empathy. It can't be taught in therapy. They instead have to learn by first deciding with their self-centeredness, do I want to get what I want and keep it without legal repercussions? And then they have to learn and practice cooperation, managing their explosive anger, managing their impulsive urges. So join me next week when we explore what kind of antisocial do you get when they are comorbid with another personality disorder. Forged in trauma, rising as warriors.